And we're so pleased that we have such a distinguished group of presenters. I'm Andrea Babbitt. I'm one of the co-coordinators of our group. And here with us today also is Becky Nicolaides, Ian Baldwin in the back, and maybe Caitlin Parker, but she's not here yet. And Kathy also is missing, Kathy Healy. So what I want to do is thank all of you for being here. We have historians, archivists, and practitioners here to talk about archives, bringing them to the people and to the public, really. Before we get into introductions, I just want to thank the Huntington-USC ICW for generously sponsoring our events and our lunches. And if anyone wants to visit the Huntington grounds afterwards, we don't actually have passes to give out. You go to the, what is it?
You just go to the main admissions window and let them know that you came to the event, and they'll issue you a day pass. Okay, great. So if you want to do that, be sure to visit the admissions area. As a reminder, our next event will be on January 24th at 6:30 p.m. And that is our joint session with the Autry National Center's Works in Progress series. And it's a pre-circulated paper presented by William Bauer from the UNLV History Department. The title is Seeing West Mountain, California Indian Histories of California During the Great Depression. Do we have any other announcements? Any other upcoming events? Okay. Lastly, I just want to remind you all that we do have lunch afterward for all of our guests at 12, and we invite you to stay and to continue informally our conversation today. So with that, I'm going to turn to our distinguished panel. We're fortunate enough to have a wonderful group of people here who I think have all either know each other or may have worked with each other in some capacity in the past. I'll start with Jenny to my left. Jenny Watts is Curator of Photography and Visual Culture here at the Huntington Library. She has worked here since 1991, overseeing a collection of approximately 1 million images. Her exhibitions and publications related to historic and contemporary photography include, just to name a few, The Great Wide Open, panoramic photographs of the American West, Edward Weston, A Legacy, and A Strange and Fearful Interest, Death, Mourning, and Memory in the American Civil War. Jenny is also editor and author of Maynard L. Parker, Modern Photography and the American Dream, published by Yale University Press in 2012, about the life and career of a notable mid-century architectural and garden photographer. So thank you for being here, Jenny. I'm going to introduce everybody now so that we can get into our presentations. Next, I have Liza Posas. She is the Braun Research Library head librarian and Autry archivist at the Autry Museum of the American West. Liza joined the Autry in 2005. She received her MLIS from UCLA's Library and Information Studies program in 2002. For the past 6 years, she has also served as the coordinator for LA as Subject, which is a special program hosted by the USC libraries. The LA as Subject membership includes over 260 institutions and individuals collaborating to collectively preserve, archive, and share the history and culture of the Los Angeles region. Yusef Omowale is the director of the Southern California Library. SCL is a community library and archive located in South Los Angeles and founded over 50 years ago. The library holds extensive collections of histories of community resistance in Los Angeles and beyond. Prior to joining the library, Yusef was a program director at the Multicultural Collaborative. He has a master's degree in education with a specialization in community studies and research. Nathan Masters is a writer whose work focuses on the history of Los Angeles' natural and built environments. He is host, producer, and managing editor of Lost LA, an original public television series airing on KCET. His writings have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Los Angeles Magazine, The Public Historian, and other publications, including an essay in Latitudes and Angelino's Atlas. Nathan also manages public programs for the USC libraries, which is home to the LA as Subject Research Alliance. And last but not least is Professor Josh Kuhn, professor in the Annenberg School of Communication and the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at USC. He's director of the Popular Music Project at the Norman Lear Center. Earlier this year, Josh received a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, also known as the Genius Grant, and his most recent books are Songs in the Key of Los Angeles and To Live and Dine in LA, both collaborations with the LA Public Library. Josh is currently a commissioned artist with SF MoMA's Public Knowledge Project and is editing The Tide Was Always High, a catalog of essays on Latin American music in Los Angeles that will serve as a companion to his series of curated public concerts for the Getty Foundation's 2017 Art Initiative Pacific Standard Time, LA. Is that how it is, Josh? LA?
Yeah. La.
Is that, I was wondering if there was a different
You have to sing it though.
Josh is also collaborating with Los Angeles photographer George Rodriguez on his first retrospective to be published in 2017 by Hat and Beard Press. So thank you all so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be here. Each of our panelists are going to spend a few minutes presenting their experience, and then I might do a few directed questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience for discussion and questions. So without further ado, we're going to start with Jenny, and we are going to...
I'll let you know when I'll do a little bit.
Okay.
All right, so thank you all for coming this morning. It's really a pleasure to sit with all my distinguished panelists here, most of whom I know and have worked with. And thank you, Andrea, for inviting me. And thank you, Becky, for putting this together. So I'm going to talk, as I was introduced as the Curator of Photography and Visual Culture here, and I'm certainly that, and I've worked here for 25 years now. And I am going to talk this morning about a project that in the last 25 years is probably the most professionally enriching and important project that I've worked on in my time at the Huntington. And it's around the idea of the Octavia Butler papers and bringing that to the public. Many of you may have heard of Octavia Butler, or maybe you've heard of this project. But for those of you who don't know who Octavia is, she's commonly called the first African-American science fiction writer, won many, many awards during her lifetime. And this year would be the 10th anniversary of her untimely death. Next year would be her 70th birthday. And in 2008, after she died unexpectedly, the Huntington received her papers here due to a relationship that Octavia had with one of our curators. We started processing those papers immediately. It took 3 years of full-time work on that project with something like 1,800 individually cataloged items and 80 cartons of material. She saved everything. And as we were beginning to process this, it became very clear, based on the kinds of people that were reaching out to the Huntington to use the collection, that the community that was most interested in Octavia reached well beyond the bounds of our traditional scholarly audience here. So she meant a tremendous amount to, and means a tremendous amount to, a largely African-American community of creatives, of artists, writers, and others. I mean, she has a huge influence, but it was just incredibly moving to me to see what an icon she was in the African-American community. So in October 2015, we were approached by Julia Meltzer, who, if you don't know her, you need to know her, an awesome entrepreneurial founder of Clock Shop, an arts organization. She came to us and she said, look, I really want to do a project around the Octavia Butler papers. I want to bring in 12 artists, 12 creatives, 8 artists and 4 writers to immerse themselves in the archive and make something of this archive. So with that, I want to just start and just show you a brief trailer about what they were up to. We'll have to start at the beginning. So I'm sorry about the kind of wonky nature of this.
Why science fiction? Because you can look at, examine, play with anything. You got to make your own worlds. You got to write yourself in.
I'd heard about this Black science fiction writer, and I thought that Octavia Butler was a miracle. I couldn't even believe that there was this mind out there.
Bottom line, Octavia wanted to tell a good story. She was always asking why. What if this goes on?
She was a champion for science fiction. She was an Angelino.
With everything that Octavia was ever writing, she was asking herself, what is the world and who is she?
Octavia Butler is one of the greatest American writers of the late 20th century.
It's exciting to think about actually getting to know this artist through the things she left behind. What I learned was to let the archive tell you what to do.
That's going to be my motto from now on. Let the archive tell you what it wants you to do. So thus embarked this new experiment for us. We let the 12 artists in to the archive with a little bit of internal pushing, prodding. We got the communications department here to really get on board and say, look, this could really expand our audience, this could expand our reach. So we set up an Octavia Butler page on our website with the ability to link to other aspects of the creative process as it unfolded. Next, please. Our senior editor wrote a blog post on our Versa website talking about Octavia, who she was, for our general audience maybe didn't know, why we were sort of vetting her in this way, and what the Radio Imagination Project was about. And as part of that blog post, we posted this cover that is from a 1988 volume that Octavia kept. That was in her papers. It's a notebook, and this is very Octavia-ish. She was very much, sort of giving herself these sort of personal call to arms. And this one is, if you can read it, this is my life. I write best-selling novels. My novels go into the bestseller list. On or shortly after publication, my novels each travel up to the top of the bestseller list, and they reach the top and they stay on top for months, at least 2. Each of my novels does this. So be it, see to it. And essentially, after posting this, it just went nuts on social media. So if you do hashtag Octavia Butler, you come to see over 150 other Instagram users, including the musician Questlove, who some of you may know from the Roots Band on the Jimmy Fallon show, and posting this image to their followers, and it just sort of took on a life of its own, this kind of, sort of motivational call to arms. So then what happened? Well, it was an inspirational image. It was picked up by piles of news outlets and blogs who published lots of stories, many of which linked back to the blog post. This just gives you a little sense of what went on. And I think it was definitely the most read and viewed blog post ever. It was, I think we got 5,000 hits, which is a lot for us. It was sort of double what our first most blog post was. And so essentially what started as an opportunity presented to us by Clockshop, we were sort of sitting here passively, and Clockshop came to us and their Radio Imagination team created in tandem with us sort of this incredible sort of global response to Octavia Butler. We're just finishing up the project now. And really, I think for me and for a core group of us in the institution, what we took away from this, other than being incredibly inspired by this woman and her work, is that it really gave us an opportunity to move forward with future collaborations. So we are about to embark on a new initiative called 5. We've received 5 years of funding to bring in contemporary art collaborations designed to explore the Huntington's library, botanical, and art collections. What we realized in the process, or what I would say I realized in the process, is it's great to talk about new audiences. It's very hard to generate that on your own. So by partnering with collaborators who already have an established audience of followers, we were able to sort of double down on this idea of really reaching out. And certainly we would not have had the kind of outreach without Clockshop and without their social media partners and the people that were following them. So this next year, just to finish up, we are going to be partnering with the Women's Center for Creative Work. They are going to be bringing 6 artists into the collection. They're going to be working in the library collections, the botanical collections, and the art collections to create new works, either performances, site-specific installations. We just don't know what yet, which makes some people here very nervous, but that's okay. We can sit with that, we can live with that. And this is going to be a way of really sort of reaching out again beyond the bounds of our traditional constituencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Okay, so we'll turn to Lisa next.
Yes, I'm going to start here. So just briefly, thank you, first of all, Joe, for inviting me to be here and to sit amongst this panel of distinguished guests, like you've all been saying. I've been being the archivist at the Autry Museum. I'm the coordinator for LAA Subject. And basically that means I work with the LAA Subject membership of 260 or so individuals, institutions, organizations that primarily care for the historic documents and materials that tell the story of Los Angeles and its history. So members include big ones like UCLA, USC of course, USC plays a dual role, the Autry Museum. I mean, mostly everybody here is probably worked in a library or museum or institution or with somebody who's probably an LAA subject member. Researchers who research on Los Angeles can also be LAA subject members. There was no cost. We've been very warm and welcoming to everybody. So that in that sense, it makes it a little unwieldy, but it also is a fun challenge because I think it presents a unique group of entities coming together to celebrate the history of Los Angeles through promoting an awareness for archives especially. So one of the big ways we bring archives to the people is literally through the Archives Bazaar, which has been going, just finished its 11th year. This is an image of the first year, which was here at the Huntington. There was about 80 of us in what was then called the Friends Hall, which I don't know if it's there anymore.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and we did not think, we, the librarians, archivists, museum professionals, collectors, think it would be as popular as it was. But we were slammed. I was passing around cough drops to people because our throats were sore from talking all day, and we had in-depth discussions. One of my coworkers was there to sit at the table, but she manages IT, and she's like, I use this. I have nothing to add to this because people were asking such in-depth questions about research about the Los Angeles. So it's super, super exciting for the next thing. So it has grown, like I said, it's 11 years old. It now includes over 90 exhibitors. I'm sorry, the first one wasn't 80, it was more like 60, but now includes like 90 exhibitors. It's at the USC Divinity Library. It's always in October, always on a Saturday when the USC football team is not playing. So that will give you 2 Saturdays to choose from. So you can probably guess when the 2017 Archives Bazaar is going to happen. And yes, people bring they bring candy, they bring literature, but they also bring in archives, and this has been like, I think, everybody's favorite picture because it's often used. So, like I said, we literally bring the archives to the people. It started off with a scholarly group at Huntington, but now it involves the community as well as your traditional academics. Next slide, please. We also started adding programming. So, the first floor, you can see the exhibits of the people, but then there's programming done by researchers, done by the archivists. We also have a hands-on component, which is in the upper right-hand corner now, where people can learn about taking care of these archives that they might have. And it really is geared towards the home archivist. And to the left is our lovely Wally Scheidler. He won the Avery Clayton Spirit Award, which we give every year at the Archives Bazaar, the end of the Archives Bazaar. So he is a person who is living history. He also has a collection, and you get to meet people like him at the Archives Bazaar. Next slide. Another component we added last year for our 10th anniversary was a History Keepers exhibit. That was at the Pico House last year, and it was in a spot in El Pueblo this year. But that is where we gave members a directive to say, give us an object that describes Los Angeles history and why, and we put it together. Not that much interpretation, and I thought it was a wonderful way of bringing our members together. And again, displaying things sort of in an exhibit environment, but really making people who come to visit the exhibit read the descriptions because some things just weren't naturally connected. So this is one of the few exhibits where I've seen where everybody actually read all the descriptions because they're like, why is the smudge pot next to this acrylic painting of somebody getting kicked out of the shops reading it? It was very, very, very successful. And we got like 15,000 visitors in 3 weeks, and we did the same. Yeah, I know. That's a museum professional, that's a lot. Next slide. So another way, so this is our old website. We do have a new website now, but some of you might have perused the LA Subject Directory. I kind of pasted together, but each member has a directory page, and for some places like the Metro, it might be a secondary source for them to provide information about their collections, but for little collections like the San Fernando Valley Historical Society, this is their only online presence. And they have remarkable collections just like any other bigger institution. In fact, being in Los Angeles, you can imagine if you've researched anything in Los Angeles, there are wonderful jewels scattered everywhere, which is why LA's subject was formed. Next slide. So we have literally taken archives to the community through the Archives Design. Virtually take archives or connect archives to the public by our LA Subject Directory and our LA Subject website and work that Nathan does, which we'll be talking to. But we also work behind the scenes. So to the left is a group of young professional archivists who, under a grant-funded project from the Institute of Museums and Libraries, and IMLS, and Institute of Museum Services. And they actually helped some of the smaller institutions that couldn't afford an archivist or couldn't really have an archivist full time for 9 months, definitely because they didn't have the workspace. So they worked with the likes of the California Police History Museum, the Pasadena Historical Society, the Center for Social Studies and Political Graphics. So their work was to actually do the processing of the collection so they can become more accessible. The Theodore Payne Foundation was one of them. We should, Unforgetting LA was also a project we did in trying to build Wikipedia articles, which was fun, but we tried different things. We also meet every other month in different locations. So next, in a couple weeks, in December 20th, we're going to be meeting at the Lummis Home. And usually involves LA's business, but also a talk about what we plan for the future. And then Monomania LA is another grant project that we have that really also highlights the people who take care of the collections. And one thing that sets LA as subject apart from other sort of projects dealing with LA history is we really try to focus on the archives and the people who care for them, because the Octavia Butler project is wonderful, right? And that's what you want. But remember, she said it took 3 years to process full time. And that's where the membership can really want to help beef that up and advocate for that so we can do the end result and have the access. I think that was my last slide. Let me see. That's it. That was it.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, we're going to go to Nathan next. So Nathan, do you want me to pull up your video now?
In a minute, yeah, I'll give you a so, what's it? Oh yeah, sure. So for the last, 6 years, since January 2011, I've been writing regular blog posts and photo essays using visual materials from LA's subject members, and I'm really happy that I'm able to go right after Liza because she's already introduced LA's subject. And it's been, for somebody who has no formal training in historical research, it's been like one of the best learning experiences in my life. So we've been publishing these photo essays on KCET's website since 2011, and it's been very successful. Various topics related to Southern California history. Since then, we've had 4.3 million unique page views. Just over the last year, 911,000 page views. So we've been, over the last few years, I've kind of gotten a knack for finding ways to frame historical topics in ways that will resonate with a popular audience, especially like a social media audience or an online audience. And KCET liked what we were doing, so a couple years ago, now almost like 2.5 years ago, the guy who's now the Chief Creative Officer, Juan Devis, approached us and said, hey, let's take this web editorial series and try to turn it into a broadcast series. So that is sort of the origin story of Lost LA, which I'm going to talk about. I'm also going to talk about monomania and a couple other things. Why don't I just say this before we go to the video? I get a lot of questions about the name Lost LA, and I'll to be perfectly honest, right? Part of the reason behind the name is we needed to find something marketable that would resonate with an audience. It couldn't sound. The name is kind of constraining in some ways, but we've decided to interpret Lost in a broad way. And the title sequence here, my narration will sort of give you a sense of how we interpreted that.
Entire neighborhoods, Moldo. Yeah. Much of Los Angeles' past is lost to history. Landmarks that once graced souvenir postcards vanish. Historic buildings and even entire neighborhoods bulldozed in the name of progress. And it's not just places we've lost, it's languages, traditions, people too. Communities conquered, and then their conquest whitewashed. But there's one place we can rediscover these lost stories, the archives. Lost LA explores Southern California history by bringing these archival materials to life. Hi, I'm Nathan Masters, and this is Lost LA.
So we premiered a pilot season in January. 3 episodes, 30-minute episodes, 3 segments in each episode. It did very well. We had, I'm not sure exactly what the term means, but the folks at KCET said that it had a household reach of 6.1 million. But then also the number they gave us was 621,000 gross quarter-hour viewers. That's like a Nielsen term. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it was very successful. And the pilot season, we're gonna fine tune it and try to make it even better. But we're gonna move forward. The ratings were strong enough so that we're getting like private foundation support. KCET's also committed some of their own institutional funds. I should say though that the pilot season was we did it on a shoestring budget. It was a partnership of USC, the USC libraries, and KCET, and I'm very grateful to the support of like Dean Catherine Quinlan and Juan Devis at KCET. They really believed in it. But I do want to talk about a couple other projects that we've either finished or that we're working on. Do I still have a couple minutes? Okay, good. Because Lost LA, so the title of this panel is Bringing Archives to the People. Lost LA, I feel, is bringing history to the people with the help of archives and documentary filmmakers. But there are a couple other projects that are more explicitly about archives. So Monomania LA, which Lisa already mentioned, we did that in late 2014, early 2015. And we profiled 5 obsessive collectors of Los Angeles history. So there's the David Boulay, who's collected everything there is about the California Orange. Carol Wells, who's she's amassed this amazing archive of political posters. She runs the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. Ernie Marquez, whose collection is now here at the Huntington, his family history goes back to the beginnings of colonial California. And he has an amazing collection related to Santa Monica, but also Southern California more generally. Right. Kent Kirkton, who just retired from the Tom Bradley Center at CSUN. He has an amazing collection of photos by African American photographers in Los Angeles. And I'm leaving one out. The One Archives. We profiled Jim Kepner, who was essentially the founder of the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives. And some interesting discoveries that the current director made there about sci-fi reading circles in the 1950s. Another project we've kind of thought along the same lines as you and Julia in bringing Linnell George in to work with a couple amazing, huge collections we have at the USC libraries related to the Rodney King beating and the 1992 riots. These are the official records of the Christopher and Warren commissions, which investigated the police culture in the wake of the Rodney King beating, and then the police response to the subsequent riots. And we paired Linnell with this amazing animator who worked on Lost LA, Javier Barboza. And we're still in the very beginning stages of this, but we just basically want these two creative people to come into the archives and create a couple long-form stories. Linnell was, during the riots, was a cub reporter for the LA Weekly. So we want her to reflect on her experiences in light of her explorations of this archive. And then Javier will find a way to contextualize that in the film.
Great, thank you so much, Nathan. We'll turn to Josh Kuhn next.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My first order of business is I think we need to get a grant to get a tripod for you, Becky.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop soon.
How are your arms not asleep? Amazing. I echo the comments so far. It's a real honor to be on this panel with everybody whose work inspires me and who I've been able to work with in many different ways over the years, and if not yet, we will soon. Coming up. So I'm trying to think. I think maybe what I wanted to focus on, I'll talk a little bit about some projects, but first to maybe throw out some method stuff that maybe we can come back to a little bit. Because I'm not an archivist, I'm not a librarian, and I'm not linked to an institutional archive or collection in any way that I shepherd or lead or have access to. And I've been trying to think over the last few years, the more I've been doing projects that have been collaborative projects with institutions and archives and collections about what the kind of work is that I do. And I don't identify as an archivist, and I don't identify as a collector, and I don't really identify as a curator. And I've really become more and more comfortable with the fact that what I do identify with is a DJ who's not necessarily playing records anymore, but who has learned from a very young age by watching DJs, listening to DJs, loving DJs, being a DJ for a little bit, that the DJ methodology is the methodology that I bring to my archival work, or my work with archives, which is to say DJs collect, DJs so-called dig through the crates, but the collecting is always has a curative element to it, that it's always a kind of selective collecting. It's collecting in order to tell a story. In some cases, a story you already think you know, but in most cases, you're trying to tell a story that hasn't been written yet. You're trying to create new stories by connecting pre-existing cultural objects, by one record that exists over here, one record that exists over there, and how do you bring those two records together in an unexpected way to create a new story for the people, or for the audience, the people who are dancing to your music or listening to you play on the radio or in the club or whatever, or wherever it is, that through listening to bringing these different archival objects together, you're able to actually create new stories and new histories. A big part of that for me is also about a kind of despecializing special collections. I've always admired DJs because I've always seen them as archivists, but also working with informal and unofficial archives, and actually intervening in very overt ways in the power structures of the archive. As we all know, archives are rooted in power. They're rooted in the way that power is institutionalized, the way that knowledge is institutionalized, usually at the expense of the people and of the public. Or at least it lionizes the knowledge and experiences of certain publics over others. And I know we're all actively involved in the struggle against that in many ways. But for me, like as a child of hip-hop, literally growing up with hip-hop, that to me is what hip-hop has always been about. And I've learned from hip-hop DJs and hip-hop scholars and hip-hop fans that if you want to change the knowledge of the archive, you have to create your own archive. You've got to dig through the crates. You've got to actually connect dots that other people might not be collecting, and try to then play those stories out in different ways and animate them in ways that create new stories. So despecializing special collections has been really important for me, particularly with my work with Central Library, LAPL, and trying to take collections that are literally in the rare book rooms, that are ephemera collections, restaurant menus, sheet music, these are things to me that should never be behind glass in that way. They belong to people in very, very everyday, ephemeral ways. And our challenge for those projects was how do we bring those out and how do we despecialize it and make sure these archives feel democratic, that people have access to them, and that people can add to them and change those stories, which I know is crucial to everybody on this panel. Achille Mbembe is a scholar whose work is very influential on the way I think about archives, and particularly his work on what he talks about is decolonizing the archive. And I just think the decolonial move in thinking about archives is just crucial. And I know that Yusef, this is a big part of your work as well, and very inspired by the work that you do there. Animating archives is something that's very important to me, not just working with an archive that exists, but then figuring out how do you tell those stories. So literally, like in Lost LA, how do you, which of the 4,000 stories are you going to tell? And then the choice you make about that one story, how do you animate it? And there's a lot of burden, and a lot of responsibility, and a lot of power, and a lot of politics about those of us who get to tell these stories, and great privilege. And that's why I also always push back against the idea of that I'm not an archivist. I'm not representing anything other than my own version, personal version of what these stories tell. And I try to do that in a socially responsible way with lots of history, lots of research, and lots of work. But I do think that we always have to be mindful as archivists, as historians, as collectors, that we are, even if we have a counter archive, we're creating a new archive. And that itself involves its own kind of power dynamic about what stories get remembered. Big thing I've learned over the past 10 years, which will come as no surprise to folks who work in this every day, when you look at an archive, mostly what you're looking at is what's not there. Archives are archives of the missing. They're archives of what's not included. That's been my biggest challenge when asked to work with a collection that exists, is all I want to do is work with what's not in the collection. And then how do you do that? Do you go collect more things? Or do you use the existing materials to actually speak to absences and speak to historical omissions and the politics of collecting? Boy, I could talk about projects. That'll take me forever. I'll talk to very quickly. Liza and I worked on a great project at the Southwest Museum that, among other things, I think was the first time that undergraduate students were taking Lummis recordings and remixing them with La Bamba and Becky G and doing dance performances at the Lummis house. We haven't been invited back. I just said quickly the two projects I'm doing right now just that are in process really, really fast. One is with Pacific Standard Time and the Getty Foundation, based on LA, Los Angeles, Latin America, which, as many folks know, is launching next fall. And I have a grant to work on the musical component, one of the musical components of this. So for the last year, we've been doing research on the Latin American musical stories, kind of lost Latin American musical stories of Los Angeles, which is impossible to tell the story of LA without telling the story of Latin American music. And that research has shaped 6 public concerts. We're calling them musical interventions that we're doing at the Getty, at LACMA, here at the Huntington, the Fowler, at the Hammer, and at the $1 Million Theater downtown, that are going to be public musical reinterpretations of archival materials, most of which I've been collecting eBay. Lots of albums, lots of LPs to try to tell different stories that have been left out of the archive. And at the Huntington, the one we're doing, I'll just plug it, Mexican sound artist based in the Bay Area is going to be coming down and looking at the Huntington's exhibit, which is based on the visual botany of kind of the colonial botany materials in South America, and he is going to be creating new sound pieces based on those materials and installing them in the gardens, and then doing a performance live. Last thing is this thing I'm doing with SF MoMA that might be of interest to folks, which is I want to mention because it's a really great collaboration between a museum, a very wealthy, elite private institution, with the SF Public Library. And they're doing a series of what they're calling public knowledge events, which is pairing artists to bridge the museum with the library system. And I'm doing a project on music and eviction and gentrification and displacement in San Francisco. And right now we're in the research phase. We've been going through the sheet music collection and photography collection of the library. But then we're going to be doing musical storytelling days at branch libraries throughout the city, where we're going to be collecting people's stories of musical loss, musical history, and musical memory, And then, and this is the part I'm most excited about because I've never done anything like this before, pressing those stories on vinyl and putting the vinyl back into the circulating vinyl collection of the SF Public Library so that the archive actually becomes part of it. That's the plan, at least. So check back next year. We'll see if I pull it off. But I'll stop there.
Great.